All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today, Use of Mass Care Task Forces to Drive Planning Assumptions. I'm Christine Heiser with the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. We are pleased to welcome Mike Whitehead from the American Red Cross. Mike, can I call you the Godfather? I feel like you're the Godfather.
If you would.
Well, Mike's been around.
What? The Godfather of what?
The Godfather of Mass Care.
The National Mass Care Exercise, anyway, yeah.
All right. Well, Mike has forgotten more about Mass Care than I will probably ever know about Mass Care. So we are glad that he is here to share an exciting new tool. I will link this for you in the chat, and the PDF is available online, the use of Mass Care task forces. So he's going to go over that briefly, and then we'll have plenty of time to address questions. We are recording today. We will have the link to the recording available, as well as the slides and the PDF and all the things. So I'll just leave that as the brief introduction. And then maybe after we wrap the presentation, I'll give a little blurb about our upcoming National Mass Care exercise being hosted next month in Shippensburg. So take it away, Mike.
Great, thank you. I start all my talks that I give the same way. The greatest accomplishment of my life is I've been married 45 years to the same woman. It's a much greater accomplishment for her, of course, than it has been for me. I was a state mass care coordinator for at the state of Florida for 15 years. I worked the 2004 and 2005 hurricane season. And during that period, we had, in a period of 16 months, we had 8 hurricanes. We had 4 and 6 weeks in 2004. So I had a whole kind of 55-gallon drum of experience that was dropped on me all at once. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about, this new use of Mass Care Task Forces document, and then we're going to talk about how to determine mass care planning assumptions, and we're going to get you started on that. This is the purpose of the document. The document just got released last month. In fact, this presentation is the same presentation I made in Orlando at the National Hurricane Conference. And then I had to close that down because the sign language was distracting me. I couldn't focus on what I was doing. All right, here's the document. It's up on the National Mass Care Strategy website. Here's the nationalmasscarestrategy.org. That's there's a lot of information, multi-agency and agency information on mass care on the website. I recommend it to you. This is a picture that I took at Bay St. Louis and Hancock County, Mississippi after Katrina. It was the 3rd day I got there. It was an untold story. There were 6,000 Floridian state and local workers that were deployed into southern Mississippi after Katrina. I was one of them. For the 6 southern counties, I was responsible for coordinating the human services response. And when I went there and I looked around, and there was just horrific destruction, and there was storm surge, petroleum and sewage and rotting sea life that was spread over miles of it. And there was a lot of people that did not evacuate, and they were still staying there, and they had congregated on intact structures, and there were some of the people were still sleeping on the ground. And so I was trying to think about what was the first thing we needed to bring in there. And I thought it was cots, because if the storm couldn't drive them away, we couldn't make them leave. So the best thing we could do was get them up off the ground of this storm surge buck. And so at the end of that first day, we had a conference call at the command vehicle, which for the state of Florida, we were calling back to Tallahassee, and Tallahassee was requesting resources and sending them to southern Mississippi. And in the command vehicle, they had a conference call room that's for 4 people, and there were 8 of us in that room. I was sitting on the floor, and the table was up above us like that. So I was thinking this is what I needed to tell them was cots. So they went around the room, and then logistics chief, he called on me and he said, what does mass care need? And I said, cots. And he said, well, how many? And I had no idea. In fact, I didn't even know that it was my job to come up with a quantity. I thought, I've identified the problem, cots, and then logistics, they'll figure out how many they need and they'll send it to me. So I just made up a number. I said 10,000. And it's one of the things I learned about logistics people. If you don't, when you tell them a number, they don't go, that's outrageous. Where did you get that? They don't care. They just want the number because you're just one more problem between them and going to bed that night. So I told him 10,000, and later on, when I know now, we probably at the most needed maybe 2,000. So we ordered, 5 or 10 times more cots that the federal government paid and sent for into Hancock, Mississippi, because I came up with a mass care planning assumption. I just made it up, but I didn't know no better. So when you get in a big disaster, most people that come in big catastrophic disasters like that, I had suddenly 4 of them presented to me all at once. But most people, when they come in there, it's their first, biggest, and last disaster with emergency managers, state emergency and county emergency managers. Their first, biggest, and last. So you got to look at something called mass care complexity. And this mass care complexity is an indicator of how big and how complex and how much help you're going to need. Because this talk about forming mass care task forces is bringing in additional help. So you're looking like how many counties or parishes or municipalities that you're working with. Like in Hurricane Charlie, we suddenly had 25 counties that were hit with hurricane force winds, and they were all screaming at us at once. How many state and federal agencies are there? U.S. You can have. There's a whole in 2017 at the Puerto Rico San Juan Convention Center. That when I was there was more federal agencies there than some of them I've never even heard of before. How big is the shelter population? The shelter population is your first and best indicator of what is the level of distress going on at the county. And is CNN broadcasting live from the center of your disaster? And that's an indicator right there. Simultaneous events, like in 2004, we ultimately had over that 6-week period, we were dealing with 4 simultaneous events. So that made it a lot different. It just dramatically increased the level of complexity. And here's Hurricane Charlie that August the 13th, 2004, Friday the 13th. Here's the web EOC of the time, state EOC tracker message. And these were all the messages that were coming in on. We had 700 on the 13th and 788 and 680 and 830. So over this 4-day period, we were just inundated because, like I said, there were 25 counties. We were just completely inundated with requests for assistance. I can tell you, I know because I was there, we completely melted down. We could not handle this, the amount of requests that were going on. So when you get a lot of coordination complexity, what you get is like you get the number of tasks is going up. The complexity of the task. The task is not go in there and call somebody up and get it referred. Some of these tasks require coordinating with 2 or 3 people if you could get a hold of them. And a lot of times you couldn't get a hold of them. Like I said, the number of stakeholders. So if you're doing your regular disaster and suddenly you got this increase and the amount of staff that you have is still staying the same, you're going to have a massive degradation in the amount of service you're able to provide. So one solution to do that we've come up with is to activate a task force. And it's really a decision made by the state mass care coordinator. Requires prior planning. All right, so this is something you got to think about in advance. And there's a lot of information in that use of mass care task forces about doing this scenario. And the number of task forces or the size of the task force, or whether you're going to depend, like I said, on that coordination complexity, all those different factors. And you've got a number of options for acquiring additional staff. The EMAC is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, where other state workers will come in. And this is kind of what we're doing at this exercise in Pennsylvania. They're exercising the EMAC. FEMA is flying in state people like they would for a real disaster. And you can get additional staff like we're doing here for non-governmental aid. Red Cross, Salvation Army, the Baptists can provide additional people to work in these task forces. And of course, FEMA's it's got a good resource. So, if you're local municipalities, you can use mutual aid. Mutual aid network is in between counties. So, as I was telling y'all, Dennis Dura and I helped work on this FEMA G418 Mass Care and Emergency Assistance Planning and Operations course. It's a really good course. I'd recommend it to you. And the course comes up with these decision-making steps that review information, coordinate all these different actions that you would make as a state mass care coordinator. And in the planning document here, the task force document, we divided those tasks up into two columns. First of all, there's an operational coordination, which is, for today and tomorrow, or maybe the day after, for the next 48 hours. Those are what you're doing is you're doing conference calls. In conference calls, if your coordinating is really important, you set up a specific conference call and you hold it always at the same time so people can coordinate around here. Because conference calls are important because it's really difficult to get a hold of people. Most people, you call, their phone's busy, rolls over to email, and the email inbox, their phone box is full, and nobody has time to look at emails. So if you need to get a hold of people out and talk to them, the best time to do that is to schedule a call. And of course, you can fulfill resource shortfalls. The counties and municipalities, they contact you, they want resources. If you have the resources on hand, you can coordinate with the logistics and then the resources are going to move. The problem is if you start calling and people need something and you don't have it, then it's going to take a while to get it. So and most of the stuff is predictable. And as I discovered, normally you're going to, most people need the same items in mass care. So what you want to do is try to do planning coordination. And this is a lot of you're so busy doing the operational coordination, you don't have a lot of time to do any planning coordination. That's really what you can bring people in to help on operational coordination, but you really need them, especially the big disasters, the planning coordination, which involves these tasks right here. So this chart is in the task force document. You look at what you need. If you got, like, a lot of time they want bottled water, a truck of bottled water and a truck of shelf-stable meals. If you have it on hand, if FEMA's got it and your state's requested it, you got it sitting on hand. It's just a matter of calling up the staging area and getting it delivered to wherever the location is. Food boxes are going to take some while to get coordinated. But these services down here, if you need to contract for these additional services or work with, some of it, especially if you're trying to get it from FEMA, it's going to take weeks to months to get it. That's from the time you request it. So the earlier you identify that you've got an issue and that things are, that you're going to need this stuff, the earlier you request it, the quicker the clock starts going. So what I'm going to talk now about is how to determine the scale of the disaster and determine requirements for resources. And this was the big thing that I learned when I go in there. I've got to say, how big is big? How much, what do I need? What resources do I need? Normally it's the same number of resources. And then next thing is in what quantity. There's a national VOAD document capable on definitions and capability on the National Mass Care Strategy website. it talks about these terms: capability, capacity, and strategies. You need to understand what these are. Capability is the ability to deliver a service, right? A fire department has a capability to put out fires. They've got the trucks and the equipment and the training and the people to do that, all right? But we've got Mass Care, Red Cross has got the capability to do sheltering. A lot of NGOs have the capability to do feeding. Capacity is what level of service can you deliver? And the strategy really is what methods are you going to use to deliver that? Like, for example, you can do fixed or mobile feeding, and same thing with distribution emergency supplies. You have fixed sites, or you can have mobile distribution. And sheltering, you can do congregate sheltering or non-congregate sheltering. So we're looking at capacity measures. And sheltering, really the capacity for sheltering is you need to know the number of locations and what is the population. That's based on that information, you can figure out what are the number of resources you need. Feeding is how many meals per day for production and distribution. Because production is field kitchens and vendors, and distribution is vehicles and getting it out. They're completely different vehicles, completely different strategies to do that. And the same thing with distribution of emergency supplies, how many households per day. Now, this is kind of the demand curve over a disaster for some service deliveries, for sheltering or feeding and distribution. It always starts, it goes up, it peaks for a few days, then it goes down, levels off, and then goes out. All right. So what we do is we're looking to estimate. For us, we want to estimate what is this capacity? How many meals per day? How many? What shelter population or location? What's that capacity? When do we think we're going to get that capacity, and how many days are we going to maintain it there? So to estimate the scale of disaster, you really look at, first thing you're going to look at is the event type. And this is it an earthquake or a hurricane or a flood? Because earthquake, hurricane, and floods, they take, there's different ways to estimate your planning assumption, how many people have been affected based on that. The next thing you're going to look at is the affected area. What is the area that has had damage? And finally, within the affected area, there's different levels of impact. Level of impact is a combination of what the intensity, the magnitude and duration, and the amount of destruction. Here's a good example right here, Hurricane Katrina. See this yellow line. This is all the different wind fields that they've had. You can see that there's different levels of this is the yellow is the level that was affected, but within the level there was different impact levels based on the speed of the storm. And of course, along here, here's Waveland, Bay St. Louis area right here where I took that picture. That you've also got the storm surge that came in. That was in so many cases it went all the way in, all the way into where Interstate 10 crosses there. Now, when you say the level of intensity, it's going to be high, medium, or low. And we're looking for like a hurricane is a Cat 4 or 5. Cat 3 is a medium, and Cat 1 or 2 is low. Tropical storm force winds are in tropical storm force winds normally don't cause enough impact. A tropical storm, though, that is slow moving and can drop a lot of rain, that can create a lot of flooding damage. So there's the difference between the tropical storm, wind, not the wind necessarily, but the flooding that they can do. And we've got some estimates here, and these are all crude. This is not rocket science precision. This is all very crude. This is better than making it up type crude level. All right. And we've got some earthquake intensity levels. We've had a lot more practice estimating with hurricanes than we have, thank goodness, with earthquakes. And so now what you do is you're going to look at the affected area, and you're going to look at dividing up your affected area into a low impact zone, a medium, or a high impact zone. All right. And so here, like you say, here's this is in North Carolina. Here's the counties here. Okay, this is the high impact, medium, and low impact zone. All right. So you got within that each zone, you have an impacted population. So what's the difference between an affected and an impacted? That's, you know, so if Dennis and I are in a living next door to in a house and a category 1 or 2 hurricane comes over us, we've been affected with low impact, but we've had a low. We're both affected, but neither one of us has been impacted. But if a tree falls on Dennis' house, suddenly he's been impacted. So that's the difference. There's actually damage to the structure. And so once you get this, estimate what your impacted population is, and then within that impacted population is a population needing mass care services. So if a tree falls on somebody's house, they may have insurance, and they may have they're resilient, and they have resources. They get somebody they can go to, and they can take a. But there's other people that aren't as resilient. When they're hit, then those are the people that we're really looking that we've got going to require mass care services. Just as a general, don't write this down and say this is the way it's always going to work. But for a hurricane in the low impact zone, about of the affected, about 90% are impacted, and of that percent that is impacted, only about 1% seek shelter. In the medium impact category 3 hurricane, we're looking at about 30%, and say 3% seek shelter. In the high impact zone, like that zone, like in Bay St. Louis or the coast of Florida for Hurricane Michael, which was a category 5, it's 60% of the structures are impacted and about 5% seek shelter. All right. So that's kind of how we come up with an estimate. It's a lot more difficult. You can use, this is kind of the model. I would use the same model, or we use the same model for the National Mass Care exercise for the scenario that we did. It was a different type of disaster than it's not a hurricane, it's a different event type. And it's also much more difficult to estimate this for inland flooding, you know, where comes in and drops 15 inches of rain in 24 hours in a dense urban populated area. That's going to cause a lot of damage. So it's a lot more difficult to estimate. So remember we talked about here's what the capacity is, here's when it's going to be. All right, at the date, here's when we think the capacity we're going to have it. And then this sustainment level and the sustainment date, that's another one where you're in shelter. So we were at capacity. So the sustainment level, the way we're defining it, is when it reaches 20% of the capacity. If it's if the capacity is 1,000, your shelter population is 1,000. When it gets down to 200, that's when you're at sustainment. And the date is you can estimate when that date is. Here's some data we took from all these different. These are wildfires and hurricanes and floods, whatever. When you can see when the percent of the population, it's basically it's between 6 and 12 days. It's average around 8 days. So any delay in reaching capacity will delay the sustainment date. The longer it stays at capacity, like when you have a wildfire or something, you know, or a flood. Whatever caused the people to flee their homes, either the river rising or the wildfire evacuation, they're going to stay there until that evacuation is lifted or until the river goes down. Then that's the start of the number of days that'll take you down to get there. So this is good for you as far as you're trying to estimate into the future what are the resources we're going to need in the future to do that. And these are some of the factors that can influence. And so here you got your capacity, what your capacity date is, and 20% we're estimating it's this here. So you're really trying to estimate what the demand curve. And this is key. The sustainment date is really critical here because that's the date normally when you come in and you start doing your shelter resident transition at that date. You doing shelter resident transition with this level is very resource intensive, and plus if the people have nowhere to go, and they're not there because most of them are not there because they like it, right? They're there because something caused them to flee, and then after they evacuation order, the flood went down or whatever it came down, when it gets down to this level, and these are the people that really need the casework. So you can estimate not only when you think you're going to need your shelter resident transition, but about how many people. And these are all assumptions, right? This is, it gives you a number that you can shoot for when you're doing planning. So states have a tremendous ability to convene. You need to, like I said, a lot of you are doing this. If you're in a big catastrophic event, you've never done it before, you're not sure. What you can do is convene the shelter providers and look at estimating capacities and duration from the same thing with the feeding people. All right, they'll how long do we, what's the capacity, how long we think we're going to be doing this and out into the future, so you can get a good number, because you're going to need this number when if you're going to ask for federal resources. You're going to make your request for a federal assistance. So when you define the need, it needs to be, use this kind of structure. What is the capability? What capacity? What location? And what's your duration? Right? So when you're asking, FEMA, we need to feed 10,000 persons in Grant and Klein counties for 45 days starting on August 1st. That's the kind of information you need, right? And you can get these, you can bring in the people with the subject matter expertise while you're busy beating off the alligators in the state DOC and dealing with that. You can get this task force to come in, and it's got the subject matter expertise and the people that have done this before, and can come down and make these kind of estimates and make a recommendation to you that you can take to the state coordinating officer to make a request to FEMA. It's very important that define what needs to happen. When you start going in there and saying, okay, I want it done exactly this way, then you're either limiting your options or you're dramatically increasing the price, one or the other. So actually the people that are working at the FEMA that do this, they have a lot of practice. They've worked a lot of disasters, and they've got the expertise. But what they cannot act until you, the state, define exactly what it is that you want. And my point, and the whole point of this here, is that the Mass Care Task Force can help you do that. And on the National Mass Care Strategy website, you can see the shelter and feeding capabilities definitions, the use of Mass Care Task Forces here. Here's the 418 course, and determine Mass Care planning assumption job tools is a Red Cross tool that we have. So I think, right, I think that's I'm ready for questions. Anybody has any questions?
Thank you so much, Mike. I've never seen. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I've never seen some of those charts and the projections for the sustainability data. I just really appreciate your work on that, and thanks for sharing it with us. Anybody have any questions for Mike? I have a few, but I'll open it up to our participants on the line first.
And the
You can
one
put it
thing
in
I
the
want to
chat,
say
too.
about a lot of this is about, why do you know so? Because I have screwed up a lot. I have made, we can get a long list of, how did you learn all this? Because I screwed up. That's how I start that story up. How many cots do you need? 10,000. I just made up enough. Because I didn't know no better, right? There wasn't any instruction. There weren't any courses out there to show how to do this. And these are big events like this, and most people don't have any experience dealing with it. So, question?
Awesome. Let's go to Michelle.
So I'm going to ask a question because we kind of have a little bit different setup in Virginia. Fortunately, we haven't had to use our sheltering task force very much, but we have a sheltering task force and a feeding task force. How would you suggest, or how do you think that would work as far as rolling those, somehow or the other, rolling those two together to have a single mass care task force, or does it still make sense to have two separate task forces that speak to the state mass care coordinator who takes up a single, I guess, recommendation or theory concept of how things are looking and what they need?
That's a very good question, Michelle, because I was just looking at the plans that you have, and you guys have got great plans. You've got the shelter task force, the feeding task force. You've got a shelter resident transition plan. This stuff is that's great. Whether you need one mass care task forces or a separate shelter or a feeding task force is going to depend on back to that coordination complexity. How big. We're looking at one of our scenarios is category 4 hurricane hitting Norfolk and Rose and Hampton, all that area like that. And it's that's going right up the Chesapeake Bay like that. That's a bad disaster.
Don't even speak that into existence. Just don't. No, Mike. No.
No, I've got to, we're planning on, we've got 21 planning scenarios and we're working on them right now as to what but no, it's how complicated is it going to be? And if it's a really, if it's the biggest and bad, then you can get the EMAC resources in, because you really, I thought at one time I could get a state worker and bring them in. No, you need a professional emergency manager to come in. And they're going to say, well, that person doesn't know Virginia. Right. Well, that's true, but they know. It's a lot easier to teach them the geography of Virginia than it's teaching them how to all this detail about mass care and coordination. Plus, the task force leader is going to be your representative on the task force, and then you bring in the subject matter experts, the people who actually know that work this on the people from FEMA, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, these different NGOs. They go to disasters all over the country. You can get those people there and get them assembled and tell your EMAC person to go in there and go figure out what we think, what do we need? Okay, what do we think we're going to need, not now, but in 2 weeks and 4 weeks, all right? And ask the Red Cross, and how much of this need can you provide in 2 weeks and 4 weeks, right? Because we've got a lot of capability and capacity to Red Cross us, but we do not have an infinite supply of volunteers. These giant disasters, it's going to exceed, and especially if there's multiple giant disasters going in the United States, eventually it's going to go in there where you're going to have to say that you're going to have to go to FEMA and ask FEMA for help. And you heard this, what do you need? How bad is it? It's bad. What do you need? Everything. When you need it now, click. So what has that person just told you? Nothing. All right, we want to get out of that mode, but I was a state worker for 28 years. I know exactly what, most state workers do not have the experience that, and they don't have not experience. They did not do 4 hurricanes in 6 weeks like I did. Right. And so they don't have, I eventually by the 3rd or 4th hurricane, I'd have to have been pretty damn stupid if I didn't start figuring out what I was doing by the 3rd or 4th hurricane. Right. So, you got to bring these people in to help you. And did that answer your question?
Does, thanks.
I have a question, Mike. We've talked before about the importance of coming up with one collective target capability that everyone can agree on. Do you have any tips for navigating differences in opinion of that one target capability? We're trying to get, the county, the state, the feds, the Red Cross, everybody to buy in that, yes, we're aiming to shelter X and feed Y. How do you navigate that?
Here's what's going to happen. FEMA is going to do whatever is going to agree with whatever you're going to say. All right. They're not going to argue with you. If you say that, they may say, well, okay, this, because you're going to ask. All right. So the Red Cross, we're going to say, because it's written in there, we're going to say, this is what we think the overall demand is. And of that, for sheltering, of that overall demand, this is what part we can meet. We can meet either all of it or part of it. So if we say that and there's a shortfall, right, then you got to look at, there's not, for sheltering, there's not a lot of other NGOs that are out there that can do sheltering. Now, when it comes to feeding, you say, here's what we think here's what the overall demand is. How many meals per day do we think we're going to have to produce now and distribute? And then of that, how much can you do Red Cross? How much can you do Salvation Army? Those are the kind of questions that you can get in there. So you get them on a call and you go in there and have a discussion, and they're gonna, the people that are on the call, like I said, there are people who have a lot of experience and have done a lot of disasters like this, and they're going to say what they think, but it's going to be up to it. Once the state decides on a number, that's going to become everybody's number, because the state has the power. Once you say this is what I think, then everybody's going to fall in line, because the state has the jurisdiction.
Okay, it's the importance of getting everybody singing from the same sheet of music.
Part is just don't make up a number, and then we're all sitting there, that's crazy. But just you get everybody, you get a lot of it, you get the advice, and you come in, and then you make your decision based on that. That's what they asked me when the hurricanes come in. They say how many people are going to be sheltered, and I give them a number. And sometimes they agree, and sometimes they don't. But I give them what my estimate is.
Question on estimating for wildfires. Do you have kind of some of those formulas for wildfire disasters?
Wildfires are very easy. Very easy. You take, how many people did they say to evacuate? All right, 60,000. All right. So it's going to be between 3 and 5% of that total that are going to seek shelter, congregate shelter. That's been the experience. But it's going to say, well, it's going to vary by jurisdiction, of course, but we're given generally, these are general numbers. These are all general numbers. You say, well, I did the number you think and I wasn't right. Well, yeah, this is not a real exact science. This is what I talked about here this is a logical process to address the problem, and it is better than making it up. It's going to be a factor of what is the population, and of that population, what portion of them are impacted, and of the portion that are impacted, how many are actually going to seek mass care services.
Makes sense. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on standing task forces and tips for keeping contacts fresh and partners engaged, particularly for those of us who aren't getting, multiple large events every year?
Well, the one good thing on the task, if you have a shelter task force, you don't have a state sheltering plan, then there you go. in preparedness. Let's go work on the state sheltering plan. All right. And the same thing with the feeding, get the sheltering plan. And then when it gets updated, then when you have your annual exercise, all right, have the exercise go in and exercise the plan. Then after every set, what's going to happen though is that, see, I got a task force, but the people that are standing people that are on that task force, when the big disaster stands up, they have suddenly a full-time operational job. So that they can't. So you've got to say that you've got to bring in somebody else to be on the task force. So you're going to say, well, I'm going to use my task force. No, you can't, because those guys have operational responsibilities. The agency can bring in a substitute and be there to coordinate with you and represent the resources that agency has. But like your Red Cross person, that's saying you're on a sheltering. The Red Cross person is probably going to be in the state EOC doing operational coordination during the thing and won't be able to serve on the task force.
That really underscores the importance of having a little bench strength and having a backup contact and making sure that you're keeping touch with those folks too. It's not just, oh, here's the one contact who does everything and then now they're busy and you're out of luck.
Or you can have a national mass care exercise, Michelle. FEMA's looking for we're looking for state volunteers to do the national mass care exercise. Your FEMA region and the American Red Cross will help you put on the exercise. You can do it in coordination with your hurricane exercise. Just something to think about. Everybody, we need with the national mass care exercises are dependent upon states volunteer to. That's why I was, we were at the National VOAD, whatever, and I go to Christine at the National VOAD conference. I said, Christine, how come Pennsylvania doesn't have a national mass care exercise? She goes, I don't know, maybe we, and then now here we are.
This is all Mike's fault.
Yeah, because
so we're having a blast putting it together and inviting all the partners. It's going to be a good time. So
I see we got Ronan Delcross on. That's good. That's good. Ronan can answer all your. He's there. He's my counterpart at FEMA headquarters, and he helped work on this document as well. And he gave a presentation after mine at the hurricane conference, which talks about once you figure out what you need, now you got to go through and jump all the FEMA hoops to get the, get the resources and get them delivered. So, right, Ronan?
Yeah, we spent some time on resources. I will caveat the earlier question there on the estimate of, if we're in the same ballpark, if one of us came up with 11,000 and one of us came up with 10,000, we're probably able to easily adjust to resource either. If one of us came up with 1,000 and one of us came up with 10,000, we're off by an order of magnitude. We're definitely having a discussion.
That's good. I just said that so to make you come on the call and defend it.
We're dealing with another disaster, so I joined a little late.
And Robert from South Carolina is kind of echoing Mike's earlier comment about the difficulty of coming up with an estimate for overland flooding, particularly because their historical data overlapped with a hurricane event, so they don't have a good estimate there. So it's good anecdotal information. Other questions for Mike?
Maybe South Carolina will have a national mass care exercise. That would be.
He's really pushing this hard.
That just you got plenty of people to help you do it. All right, I'll thank you all. I appreciate it. I'm gonna email this to Christine, and she's gonna get it out to everybody.
Yeah, perfect. And if you registered for this webinar, you'll.
Or actually, I emailed it to Jen. Jen's got it, right? Jen's got it, and Jen can email it to Christine. Yeah.
All right. Whisper down the lane. We'll get it. If you registered for this webinar, I'll send you a link to download the recording, to view all the materials. so you can reference them, this great document. Thanks everybody who had a part in creating it. It sounds like it took a village, so we appreciate that. And we appreciate everybody's support and preparation for the National Mass Care exercise, which again, we are hosting here in Pennsylvania, down in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, in Cumberland County, right in the I-81 corridor. Next month is the week of May the 20th. So if anybody is interested in getting involved, coming out, participating on site at that exercise, and you need registration information, please reach out to me and we will get you hooked up there. I'll put my email address in the chat. Any other comments before we end the call here? Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, Mr. Whitehead, Michael, I just want to re-echo Christine's sentiments. You provided invaluable information that I am really waiting to get my hands on for that PowerPoint. You detailed a number of training opportunities for Mass Care Task Force members, as well as some of the other learned experiences from large-scale disasters. So thank you for your time today in providing that resource. I cannot say that more than enough. We have we're a by the hip relationship with the American Red Cross, with Joe Lentz, Rachel Choate, and Kobe here in the district. And almost any activation for mass feeding, mass sheltering, reunification, or reception centers, we're side by side with each other. So our partnership with the American Red Cross is deeply ingrained. But we are trying to develop our Mass Care Task Force, and I think what we're going to have to do is, because the turnout is relatively low, we're probably going to have to use some of your training, the recommended training venues that you've captured in your brief, to create a mass care task force that's small but able to go to any type of event, mass care services support event, and be able to deliver that, be it setting up a sheltering site, supporting mass feeding, operating reunification centers, as well as the baseline reception center. And then if it grows into a family assistance center, the mass care task force is probably going to have to be trained to do all of those.
Yeah, I live in Fairfax City, so talk to your local region people and tell them you want to invite me down to your.
I'll do that, Christine. If I can reach out and get Michael's email,
I put it in the chat.
Oh, did you? My apologies.
At the very beginning.
We do have the RESF 6, the Regional Emergency Support Function meeting here, and this may be a great addition to an upcoming workshop, or just the quarterly meetings that they have. I am sure that everybody will benefit from the knowledge that you've provided to us today.
Because I was looking at a storm going up the Potomac River, and it would push the river back into the district. So if you look at the storm when it hit in Florida, the St. Johns River, it pushes back and floods part of Jacksonville. So
that is part of the district's community risk assessment that was just completed last year. 3 months ago, I worked for DCH-SEMA as the Deputy Preparedness Planning Chief, and we produced that. And that was the #1 scenario with obviously the most large-scale and catastrophic disaster resulting from the combined effects of the wind and flooding aspects associated with the hurricane. I think we actually used, Christine, we may have used FEMA Region 3's actual scenario, to develop that for the community risk assessment.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just in DC yesterday for a supply chain workshop, and the scenario really kind of echoed that hurricane up the bay kind of scenario. So everyone loves to play that one out.
So Andrew, my son lives in the district, so I've got a personal interest in helping you out. So
excellent. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the information. And Christine, again, thank you for hosting this.
You're welcome. Thanks, Andrew, for the kind comments. Any other comments, last minute questions before we wrap up the call?
We'll see you all in Shippensburg in a couple of weeks.